do you believe that Jesus rose again from the dead? Literally.
I cannot answer that question.
Hey guys, welcome back to Against Modernism. I'm Daniel. Interesting stuff just happened. Restoring the Faith yesterday released a interesting video claiming that Jordan Peterson was Catholic. If you guys don't know Restoring the Faith, by the way, go check him out now. I'll put a link down below. Really good show. Some really good guests and, pretty interesting content. Sometimes. I've talked about Jordan on this channel before, so hence my immediate interest in this video that Mike released yesterday. And I have a long history with Jordan. I've met him before. I may have attended a school that he taught at. And I probably listened to like hundreds of hours of his lectures. I used to be a big fan before I was, back when I was pretty cringe. So what I want to do with this video is watch the podcast. The RTF, they took a clip from his podcast. So I'm gonna go into that podcast and take some more clips, and do a little bit more of a deep dive. And I'm gonna give some of my thoughts on where Jordan goes wrong in his philosophy as it relates to actual Catholic thinking. Because basically these guys are saying Jordan's Catholic, and I'm saying definitely not, because his thinking, like, he hits some points, but his overall like approach is completely anti-Catholic and like very modernist. So I'm just gonna try to show that. And I'll go through like a recap at the end and kind of give like my predictions on what actually will happen with Jordan, whether he converts or not. Okay, so here's let's dive into the first clip here, and we'll see what I have to say.
Talked about disagreements with my conceptualization of Christ, let's say, and I'm not sure what that conceptualization is, by the way, exactly. It's a mystery to me, but I can say some concrete things about it. I mean, I understand and appreciate the symbolic significance of the ideal human being, and that finds its embodiment. And I took these ideas in large part from Jung and Erich Neumann, that Christ is at least a representation of the ideal man, whatever that is. And we all, interestingly enough, we all seem to have an ideal, and that ideal has us, right? And that's where it's very interesting to consider the role of conscience, because your conscience will call you out on your behavior. And so it seems to function as something that's somewhat independent, or at least as something that you can't fully voluntarily control. Because if you could voluntarily control it, then you just tell the pesky little bastard to go away, or to pat you on the back continually.
Okay, so let's stop here for a second. What I said about Jordan before on this channel is that he's basically so invested in modern philosophy, like particularly psychoanalysis, that he's not capable of coming to Catholicism through the correct and Catholic philosophical path, which is like Aristotle, Aquinas, the scholastics, and including a lot of Catholic thinkers. I still think that's true. I still think that's completely true. He's approaching reality from the kind of the bottom up. I've said this before. I don't really know if it makes sense and if this is a good way to put it, but this is just the easiest way for me to explain it. His approach to reality is from the bottom up, kind of like an evolutionary biological determinism type of perspective, whereas the Catholic approach is from the top down, right? So it's like it's all grace for Catholics, and it's all biology for these modernist types. But I do think that he's kind of starting to see that things don't really add up when you approach reality in the way that he's approaching it. And you'd think he would have noticed this sooner. I mean, I only did like a 4-year degree. I studied like modernism, basically. And I realized it like after my first year. So I don't know why it's taking Jordan so long to come to this realization that, hey, things aren't really adding up when I deny God and I, you know, place my entire understanding of reality inside the human brain and stuff like that. But you know, everyone, you know, he at least seems to be getting there. So okay, so for example, Peterson is obsessed with Carl Jung, and who is a student of Freud. Okay, and I haven't read a ton of him. I've read I think it's called Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I've also read a book called Aeon. A lot of it is like pseudo metaphysics and him talking about his patient's dreams, and like, you know, he's like drawing all this analysis from dreams and stuff, and it's very much like how Peterson talks, which is pretty interesting stuff, right? But it's completely, you know, based on stuff that like Jung basically came up with by himself. It's not based in any like deeper truth. It's not based in Catholic spirituality or anything like that. So Jung basically says, you know, there is a soul, but he never explains what that is. It's all a mystery. And so modern scientists consider him controversial because of this. Because you're not supposed to blend spirituality or religion with your take on medical treatments, right? That's a no-no in today's science. But I think that this is why so many people find Jordan like fascinating, and this is definitely why I found him fascinating, because they recognize at least the truth in that fact, that the reasons we see so much kind of like mental illness around us in our modern societies, it's more than can be explained by science alone. You know what I mean? It's like there's like a sickness of soul, there's something else going on there that's more than just the purely biological responses, you know, purely chemical imbalances in the brain and stuff like that. There's more to it than that. There's a deeper reason, and I think Jordan touches on that, and that's why people are drawn to him, because they're like, yes, this is the answer I was looking for. I've been waiting for someone to talk about this. Little do they know, this is all completely solved by Catholicism hundreds of years before, but we'll get to that. So yeah, Peterson basically says, you know, there has to be like a narrative element to our suffering, and he kind of stresses that point. And I think he at least understands that much about the truth, because that's a big part of Catholicism, is that our suffering plays a role. Suffering in general plays a role in the salvation narrative, right? So we're somehow connected to something bigger than ourselves, and it's not just biology or you know, a product of evolution or something like that, and it's not just, you know, chemicals and all that, as I just said. The problem with this whole thing is that, as I said, like, Catholicism identified and answered all of these questions, like, definitively and in writing. Okay, like, everything is covered, like 600 years before Jung was even born. Jung was born in like 1875 or something like that. Catholicism had it completely solved in like 1275, like done. Like you could find anything basically. And if you go like 300 years further, you could really find anything. So these guys are just making stuff up. If you look at this like historically, these philosophers are just popping up out of nowhere saying, and this is a product of modernism, the modernists trained in philosophy, but they basically pop up, they deny everything that came before them. They don't even look at it, basically. And then they say, I'm going to come up with my own worldview, and I'm going to use this to explain like weird phenomenon that's happening with people's psychology, right? Little do they know, Catholicism actually solved this and offered all the solutions, and has been offering them since Jesus Christ died on the cross. So it's amazing to me that they're either ignorant or they're completely, you know, full of pride and unwilling to drop the philosophies that they've created in favor of actual truth. So if you understand like hylomorphism, for example, it solves these like like the problems that psychoanalysis is attempting to solve, not philosophically but practically speaking, in like patients. They're using a random like metaphysics that Jung just made up in his head. We have Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics that actually works in the entire Catholic framework, of course. But if you understand like the Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics, their concept of matter and form, and you apply that to the human soul, so you can actually have a solid definition for the soul rather than Jung's like pseudo like non-definition, it's pretty obvious that like the ailments of the body and like the mind are directly tied to the health of the soul. And this actually has to be the case in Thomistic metaphysics, because the soul is the form of the body. So the soul is like, the body is the soul is the act of the body, and the body is the potential, right? So this is like the most obvious and most comprehensive answer to the questions that Jordan and Jung ultimately are like trying to desperately solve, right? These guys are crying, like he's going on podcasts and crying about these problems because they're so difficult. It's pretty simple, man. It's Catholicism. You just learn the simple metaphysics. I can learn it. I'm a plumber. You can definitely learn it. You're clearly a intelligent dude. So yeah, it's all been done. Go read Aquinas's commentary on De Anima. Like, it's not difficult. Okay, let's look at the next clip.
Because there must be few things in life more pleasurable than being a fully committed narcissist. To really believe that everything that you do is right and that you're a good person. And I suppose if you could wave a magic wand and rearrange your mind so that it was constantly telling you that, you'd do it. But you don't seem to be able to do that in relationship to your conscience. It trips you up. And so it tells you when you're not living up to your own ideal. And that means that you have an ideal and you don't even know what the hell it is, but you certainly know when you transgress against it. And I know that there's a strong line of Christian thinking that's identified the conscience with divinity, sometimes with Christ inside, sometimes with the Holy Spirit. And those are very interesting conceptualizations, but you can think of them psychologically, and you can even think about them biologically, to some degree, because we're so social. If we don't manifest an appropriate moral reciprocity, we're going to become alienated from our fellows, and we won't survive, and we'll suffer and die, and we certainly won't find a partner and have children successfully. And so to some degree, the conscience can be viewed as the voice of reciprocal society within, and that's a perfectly reasonable biological explanation. But the thing is the deeper you go into biology, the more it shades into something that appears to be religious, because you start analyzing the fundamental structure of the psyche itself. And it becomes something, well, it becomes something with a power that transcends your ability to resist it.
Okay, stop. Man, again, he's approaching everything from the bottom up. Okay? It's so typical of the modernist to claim that everything can be explained socially and biologically. Like, all modernists revert to this. All my friends who are modernists, who have like this, like they have a potential in them to see the truth, and I would say that they're actually, their wills are kind of inclined towards the truth, but they have such a difficulty getting past this switch up. Okay? Modernists always see things from the bottom up. They always see things as a product of biology and socialization. But that's just not the case. Isn't anyone tired of these terrible takes? Like, this is the biggest reason why I don't think Jordan will ever become truly Catholic, because he's so stuck in this mindset. He's unable to give up what I would call like biological determinism, this approach to reality. This idea that everything that happens in the world can be explained and understood if only we were more in touch with the biological processes and social upbringing of each person. Like, if we knew every single chemical reaction going on in the brain and in the body in real time, and if we if we had like an in-depth recording of someone's life down to the most personal details and smallest social interactions, then we'd be able to like solve the math equation, right? We'd be able to like completely figure that person out. But let me clear this up for you guys. Jordan's speaking about the mystery of our conscience. Why do we have this voice in our heads and that distinguishes us from animals? Well, the Catholic answer is really simple. We, as humans, are made in the image of God. And what does that mean? That means we are bestowed with intellects, and intellects are divine in nature. And our conscience is not the Holy Ghost or Jesus Christ speaking to us in our mind, like Jordan says some Christians believe. I'm not sure where he got that. But this conscience is a product of the nature of our intellect. So if you think about it, if you think about the intellect as a sense, which Aristotle did, he posed it as the sixth sense. If you think about it as a sense, think about our eyes, okay? Our eyes are an organ that was designed to see specific colors and like distances, etc., right? It has limitations. It is designed specifically to see certain objects and, give us the information about them. Our intellect was designed similarly. So our intellect is designed to operate in accordance to the order of reality. Just like our eyes are operated to see reality, our intellect is designed in accordance to understand reality. This might be a new way of looking at it for a lot of you, but this is like a very reasonable and rational way of looking at it, I think. So what does that mean? That means that both our intellect and our sense organs, they're not only created by God, but they're necessarily sustained by Him at every second. So the fact that our intellect is designed to correspond with reality, and that our quote-unquote conscience speaks to us when we are acting in a disordered way, it's no surprise, because our intellect is saying something is wrong here. Just like if you're with your eyes, for instance, your organ, there's proper and improper ways to use it, right? You don't try to see through like your eyelids. You don't try to close your eyes when you're trying to look at something. You don't look at the sun, for instance. So there's certain ways to use your eyes correctly. There's also certain ways to use your intellect correctly. So when you're acting out of accordance with the order of the universe, of course there's going to be a I don't know what you'd call it, like a reaction from your intellect that's negative, and that's your conscience. That's what he's referring to when he's saying, when we're doing something wrong and we know it's wrong, we have this thing in our head that tells us, don't do it. Well, yeah, it's because it's the same way when you look at the sun, you want to close your eyes. It's the exact same thing. Okay, and so Aristotle, he says that the intellectual part of the soul, and he says that there's a place in the soul that's the intellectual part. That part of it, I think we've moved past that, but let's just talk about this because it's an interesting point. He says that the intellectual part of the soul is the place of forms. Okay, and this is like he's talking about Platonic forms, and so. And what that means is like the essence of things, which we've talked about before on this channel. So our ability to understand the essences of other things and the importance of our actions in relation to those essences is exactly what differentiates us from animals. So for instance, since we know now the essence of marriage as it was revealed to us by Christ and by the Catholic Church, the essence of marriage is that it's a contract between a man and a woman, right? It has a primary purpose of having children and raising them in the Catholic faith, and it has a secondary purpose of fulfilling the needs of the spouses. So when we understand the essence of what a marriage is, and there's a higher theological part of the essence as well, where the marriage imitates Christ's relationship with the church, of course. And there's a lot else to it. But once we understand the essence of a thing, that guides the way that we act, and that determines what is appropriate action versus what is inappropriate, right? So animals don't do this. Animals just operate on basic instincts, and they can be advanced instincts as well, but they don't operate on understanding the essence of something and then acting in accordance with what that is, which humans do. So it's really not confusing for Catholics. It's pretty simple. All of Jordan's questions about the conscience and how he poses this as a problem, it's really not a problem at all. You just have to have the right conception of what a person is, right? That's like the main. That really is the main thing. I mean, when you get into fields like psychology and whatever Jordan thinks that he's doing, I don't know what you call it. It's like kind of philosophy, kind of religious, kind of psychology. When you get into this field, a lot of it is based on like morality and ethics, or at least partially related to those things. And when you're talking about morality, I mean, what was the first thing what was like Socrates' first principle? It was know thyself, right? So if you don't even know what a person is and what a soul is, and you don't have definitive answers to these things, you're never going to be able to offer people any moral advice or anything like that. You're never going to be able to. A lot of people see Jordan as this kind of like father figure, who's offering great life advice and moral advice as well. But really, you can't offer any moral advice if you don't at least know what a person is. So, I mean, I think it's way off to say that this guy is converting to Catholicism. But anyway, to understand all this properly, basically, it requires a shift of thinking, right? Especially for these secular types, especially for Jordan Peterson, because he is like the king of like applied modernist philosophy. He's fully adopted this pseudoscientific psychoanalysis stuff made by Jews, by the way. And yeah, he just focuses on biological and social causes, and then adds like a touch of mythology and a touch of spirituality, with no explanation about, like actual spiritual like facts, like the composition of the soul and stuff like that, which Aristotle and Aquinas provide perfectly reasonable answers for. So what do we learn here? You got to focus on the highest causes first, otherwise you will literally go insane, and you have to have your basic explanations for what people are, what souls are, what God is. All these things are important, and I don't think Jordan has any of those answers, or at least he doesn't accept them. Okay, let's continue with the video.
So you can think about Christ from a psychological perspective, and my critic, this particular critic that I've been reading, said, well, that doesn't differentiate Christ much from a whole sequence of dying and resurrecting mythological gods. And of course, people have made that claim in comparative religion. Joseph Campbell did that, and Jung to a lesser degree, I would say, but Campbell did that. But the difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out as well, the difference between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now, you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense, because it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief, and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. That's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. We have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
If you believed in the story of Christ, or if you believed that history and let's say the narrative meet, let's
both,
say.
I think you... Because when you believe that, you buy both those stories. You believe that the narrative and the objective can actually touch.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really good. Let's see what he's talking about here. If you're not Catholic, I don't know how many of my people who watch this are actually Catholic, but if you're not Catholic, think about this for a second, okay? The Old Testament, which was probably written like 1,000 or so years before Christ was born. I think that's the consensus. I'm not exactly sure. The Old Testament is completely... It's a lot of different stories, okay? It's a lot of different books. A lot of different stories. It is completely full of prophecies and like foreshadowing, okay? About a savior. And it's just full of it. Like, it's difficult to describe unless you've like been Catholic for a while and you've been reading a lot. But the foreshadowing, and they call it, actually, there's like a area of study in Catholicism, in Catholic scholarship, called like typology, that studies this stuff. But it's nuts. Like, there's tons of it. There's so much stuff that it is difficult to like... if you're trying to argue against the faith being legit, it's very difficult once you start to see all the typology. But I'll explain that right now. So you have the Old Testament, right? You have all these stories. And then you have the New Testament, which is the birth, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Christ, and the beginning of the church. And these are all actually like recorded in history apart from the New Testament as well. Like thousands and thousands of witnesses. Actually, I think there's more historical proof of Christ's existence than of like Alexander the Great. I heard that somewhere. I don't know if I think it is true, but it makes sense. I mean, look at how Christianity spread. Okay, so basically you have this old prophetic narrative of the Old Testament, right? And you have the historical facts about Jesus, and you have the New Testament. Okay, the scariest thing here, and I think this is part of what's scaring Jordan. If you're approaching this issue as a skeptic, like he is, because basically he wants to look at it and be like, well, this is all really great stories, right? But it can't be true, right? But then you look at it and you're like, wait a minute. Because the historical life of Christ is like a perfect fulfillment of the prophecies and the what Jordan might call like the archetypal narratives contained in the Old Testament. Like, guys, if you don't know, you don't know. But if you know, you know. And it's like perfect. Okay? It's nuts. You could study for like hundreds of thousands of hours and not get all of the references. It's insane. It's mind-boggling when you first start to like see it. And Peterson himself actually did a lot of his own analysis, which I don't recommend for most people. But he did a lot of his own, and I think he saw a lot of these references. Like, a lot of them are buried in like stories and like symbols and stuff like that. But he saw a lot of them, and he's scared by it because he still came to the conclusion that something was like too perfect here. And that could mean that he was wrong about all of his secular assumptions, all of his biology worship and socialization worship type assumptions, where he says, sorry, I don't mean worship, but you know what I mean. I mean, like, he believes that those things are what like forms someone, what determines someone's actions, and what creates their conscience or something. It has like a deep effect on it. So coming from outside the faith, from a secular background, it's really scary when you start to see these things. For me, it was real, like, it was terrifying, and I was just like, this is a lot of stuff, because it means you have to rethink the most basic assumptions about the world. And when you start to rethink your most basic assumptions, it begins like a complete overhaul of your mind, because basically everything you thought before has to be reformed to the new truth that you've accepted. And that's very, very scary and very difficult for most people. And I think that's what he's talking about here when he says it's terrifying. It's terrifying for him to think about someone who's actually accepted all these things as true, which is all traditional Catholics, by the way. But yeah, he's terrified of what it would mean to flip his mind kind of the right side up, I would say. Okay, next clip.
So we talked about the narrative and the objective touching, and so I wanted to touch on that again. Is that, like, I understand C.S. Lewis's argument, and I'm even inclined from time to time to think, well, I've got the choice between believing two impossible things. I can either believe that the world is constituted so that God took on flesh and was crucified and died and rose 3 days later, or I can believe that human beings invented this unbelievably preposterous story that stretched into every atom of culture. And it isn't obvious to me that the second hypothesis is any easier to believe than the first, because the more you investigate the manifestations of the story of Christ, the more insanely complicated and far-reaching it becomes.
Okay, this is actually really good. And to be fair to Mike from RTF and Kennedy from Boomersville, apparently, this actually gives me a bit of hope for Peterson. If he manages to fix his broken philosophy. Because when I converted, my conversion kind of began with a similar idea. It wasn't about the legitimacy of Jesus Christ, but it was about the legitimacy of God in general, the existence of God and the universe. And conversions kind of all start with realizing that our base assumptions about the most crucial matters of reality come down to choosing between like two impossible things. So for me, I had to choose between two ideas, and the first idea was that the idea that the universe as we know it has always existed. Okay, that's one option you have, and it seems impossible when you think about it. It really doesn't make any sense. Like, how could something always exist? It doesn't make any sense. The second idea is that the universe, or existence itself, is created by God. Okay, those are really the only two options you have. You can't have a third option and say, well, the Big Bang created the universe, because then you're left asking, well, where did the Big Bang come from? Right? So you're stuck with two. You have to answer with one. And for me, one is comprehensible to me in a way. That is, God creating the universe is comprehensible in a way. And the other is completely incomprehensible. My mind doesn't grasp it at all. So I chose it. And also, God creating the universe now provides, there's purpose to life, and there's other things like that. So when you have this ability to choose between two, first of all, you can't know which one's true for sure. And second of all, they both seem very unlikely and difficult to believe. Why would you choose the universe has always existed unless you want to free yourself from all moral responsibility, which I believe a lot of secularists do. But for me, God created everything. That seems the most plausible. And for other philosophical reasons, which I won't get into now, but there's a lot more proof for me that God created everything than there is that the universe has kind of always existed, and there's random mutations that cause humans to exist, stuff like that. So yeah, at the time, that choice that I made between these two unlikely scenarios seemed difficult because they both seemed pretty unlikely. But really, when I look back at it, only one of them makes any sense. And it only seemed like a difficult choice at the time because I was stuck in that secular mindset where I'd never really considered the origin of the universe, and I had a built-in attachment, I guess, to the idea that there could not be a God, and definitely not the God that Christians claim there was. And I think this is because there's a lot of anti-Catholic propaganda in society now. There's a lot of wizard in the sky type jokes and ribbing when you're growing up and stuff like that. So I just came to the conclusion that I think I had a built-in avoidance of these ideas, but then I came to them and I said I had to face them, and I ultimately I chose that they were true. I didn't choose that they were true. I chose to accept their truth, right? So Jordan's facing his own choice here, and that's between believing that Christ is actually the Son of God, or believing that billions of Christians throughout the last 2,000 years have devoted their entire lives to believing in a lie. And again, your answer to this question, how you decide, it firmly decides which camp you're in for the rest of your thoughts, basically. So if you deny the legitimacy of Christ here in this question, if you deny Christ's divinity, that is, you're throwing away most of Western culture, and you're also spitting on your ancestors. Literally, you're spitting on your ancestors if you deny the divinity of Christ. You're also denying God. So but this is aimed at seculars. So, so this choice between impossibilities reminds me of what C.S. Lewis said, and I think Jordan might have been referencing that here. I think he got the reference wrong, or maybe we're talking about different things. But sorry, one sec, my phone's ringing. But basically, C.S. Lewis said that Christ was either God or he was a bad man. And when you think about that, that's a pretty compelling statement, isn't it? Because Jesus is either telling the truth and he is God, or he's lying. And if he's lying, he's a man who wants you to believe he's a god. He is the God, right? So the latter scenario would make him a pretty pathetic and evil guy. What kind of guy wants you to believe that they're God, right? So, and Christ was not pathetic or evil, very clearly in the stories and the real accounts of him. So then it's most likely that he is indeed God. He is what he claims to be, right? So my question is, what's it going to be, Jordan? You can't really weasel your way out of this question, because the answer that you decide on is a life-changing one, and not just a life-changing, but it will a soul-changing question. It will lead to your salvation or to your damnation, right? And you have to make the choice. And I think he's faced with that choice, and he is so burdened by his broken brain from his terrible philosophies that it's difficult for him. And that's why you see him crying. I think Kennedy sees him crying because he's talking about how beautiful Jesus is. I think he's crying because he's a weasel. He's scared. Anyway, I think that's enough analysis for today. Okay, what are your predictions about this, guys? Does Jordan convert to the Catholic faith? And if so, do you think he'll go full bridge builder mode? Or will he find the traditional Catholic faith? My prediction, considering his track record and the events leading up to this video, is that this is all part of his grift. Actually, Trad Patrick just released a video talking about how Catholics always jump on these like Catholic Twitter and Catholics in general. They kind of like jump on these potential converts, especially when they're celebrities. And it really helps the celebrities grift off them, right? And it's like totally well-intentioned on the part of the people who are supporting them. I get that, and I completely sympathize, and I want people to convert too. But guys, you got to look at the situation and say like, and look at what's really happening here. I mean, I'll link that episode in the description, but Trad Patrick does a really good job talking about that. Yeah, he makes some good points about like how grifters abuse Catholicism to make money, and he that's like a recurring theme in Trad Patrick's shows, kind of a specialty. But I think he recently mentioned like Abby Johnson. How much does she charge for speaking fees, guys? I email her and ask. I'm curious what the responses are. I bet you'd be surprised. I mean, and I'm referring to Abby Johnson because she recently hopped on the TLM train publicly, and I feel like that was a big part of her grift. But if you want, I think the most compelling proof is actually Jordan Peterson himself, guys. I really can't believe Kennedy Hall thinks this guy's conversion is legit. Just listen to these numbers, okay? This guy claimed, Jordan Peterson, he claimed to be making, okay? This was like a couple of years ago. This guy claimed to be making around $40,000 per speaking arrangement, okay? He would go and speak for like an hour and make 40 grand, okay? Every speaking arrangement. So he probably did what? 1 or 2 of these per weekend, okay? Also, on top of that, he had $100,000 a month from Patreon donations, okay? So let's say he did 2 speaking arrangements per month and he's making $100,000 a month. That means he's making $180,000 a month, okay? And guess what else, guys? He was making over $200,000 per month in his own clinical practice, okay? Whatever that means, I don't know. But he's making, so what is he at now? A lot of money, okay? And his books are also #1 on Amazon, so you can just imagine the millions coming in there as well. Okay, so for guys, can we just look at the numbers for a second here? Okay, is he converting? Okay, so what happened was, and you know, I'm pushing my narrative that this is a false conversion for money. I completely think that's true. I hope it's not. I really hope it's not. But here's what happened, okay? He got a call from Bishop Barron's Word on Fire team, and that kicked off this whole thing. I guarantee you that's what kicked it off. That's what kicked off his St. Michael the Archangel tweet. That's what kicked off his telling people about his wife's getting more religious. That's what kicked off his talking to Jonathan Pajot about Catholicism. That's what kicked off all this stuff, okay? That's what's happening. He sees the opportunity. Word on Fire probably told him, like, gave him some analytic data or something like that, and he got a new the grift light just, the grift light bulb just exploded in his head, and he just went all in on the Catholicism. I think that's what happened. So he basically said, yeah, Catholics got it right. Catholics make the most sense. Just like what Abby Johnson said, trads make the most sense. TLM makes the most sense. You know, not SSPX, but, you know, the TLM, let's go to the diocesan indult mass, I guess. But yeah, it's all part of the grift, guys, in my humble opinion. And also, by the way, I really hope I'm wrong. And I really hope he experiences a true conversion to the traditional Catholic faith. Because he would, if he did, and he went public with it, he might save potentially millions of souls, okay? Because he has a huge following. But he won't. And you know why? Because as soon as you convert for real, and you change your whole life, he will lose everything he has if he converts. Everything. He will get deplatformed immediately, Patreon shut down, business ventures shut down, everything shut down. He'll make no money. And that's because that's how it is. That's how it is. If you want to be a real Catholic, you're not going to make money off it. People are going to hate you. That's just the way it is. So that's it for today, guys. Pray the rosary as often as you can. I swear, if you're not Catholic and you pray the rosary every day, you just pray it and you try to think about the mysteries, and you say all the words, you will actually convert. You will literally convert to Catholicism. I don't believe it. Go try me. You want to prove me wrong? Go pray the rosary for 3 months and actually try to do it and get back to me. See what happens. If you're not Catholic, just try. So pray for Jordan. Please pray for my conversion. Pray for your own conversion. And pray for the souls of all sinners, heretics, and schismatics. And that's all for today. Thank you very much. Like, comment, subscribe if you want. And I'll see you next time, guys.